What is up, everybody? Welcome to yet another episode of the Father Dynasty Podcast. I'm your fatherly host, Chew, here in the manhole, here to talk fatherhood, fantasy football, and everything in between. It's been a minute since the podcast has been on. This is actually the first one of 2024, but who better to join me than the most frequent guest, my fearless commissioner, and we'll find out, is he more Harvey Specter or Mike Ross when it comes to dynasty trade negotiations. Follow him on Twitter at tdaily11. Tyler, how are you doing, brother?
Doing great. Like we were talking about leading up to hitting the record button, just getting settled back in after my wife lands the plane from the end of the college football season, which was extremely hectic both for her and us as a family, with her being gone. So just enjoying settling back in. We took the pacifier away from Emma last weekend. Things are going pretty smooth. So all's well over here. Enjoying the NFL playoffs. We could just get it to stop raining. I think life would be pretty perfect right now.
Yeah. Well, you say raining, so I'm wondering where you're at. What level of snow have you gotten, if any?
0.
Nothing?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So, we have not seen any snow so far. I'm a little growing up where we did. You know, I think you guys have probably gotten some snow. I definitely miss it. It's just been a sloppy, wet mess down here in Charlotte.
That's what she said. So, yeah, that was the one thing that I was thinking when I was thinking of the question of, like, yeah, what does Emma think about the snow? I was like, she may not think anything of it right now.
That's right. Yeah, she doesn't have any opinion on it because, believe it or not, she has made it through 2 years and some change of being alive without seeing any snow.
That's wild.
Yeah, so I'm hoping, I mean, surely one of these years we're going to get something down here because, you know, in the few years leading up to when Megan and I were dating, and then I think even we had a storm or two after we got married where we had, you know, it's never been anything crazy, like, and not to say that in Roanoke there's anything super crazy, but I mean, you know, nowhere near like a 6 or an 8-inch storm, which isn't totally unheard of in Roanoke. We would usually get enough to, you know, you could make some snowballs, and, you know, parking lots would have the dusting over top of it, but which of course means down here, even though that's virtually nothing, all the bread and the milk flies off the shelves so that people can feel good about hunkering down for the apocalypse. So that has been a silver lining to us not having snow, is we haven't had any sort of that panic grocery buying where you're there on a Thursday, it's supposed to snow on Saturday, and like you're just getting your normal groceries because you're not a anxiety-ridden snow freak, and you're like, wait a minute, why can I not buy any milk? You check the forecast and there's a half inch of snow dusting they're calling for.
Yeah, well, much like I'm sure you remember, a lot of the times, you know, we would be closed at the threat of snow, then that day comes and there's sincerely nothing happening. We had a bit of an issue like that. I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, that there was the threat of the snow. It didn't happen. And then a week after that, I apparently wasn't paying attention to the weather, and we got basically what they said we were going to get the week before, plus another inch or two. So needless to say, I wasn't fully grocery ready for the one that actually happened. But when the first one went, I just had to get stuff from the grocery store. Yeah, I was thoroughly annoyed with the parking lot, which it's a decent sized parking lot. You had to actually search to find a spot. And
is it the Kroger at Towers?
We do they call it the Gucci Kroger of, I always think Blacksburg, but like it's a kind of a nicer one near Cave Spring High School. Okay. Yeah. So they have two. One's like Cave Spring Corner at like Electric and Brambleton, and then we have one that's like closer to us a little bit. But yeah, it is a parking lot, and the amount of people that go there normally, you should never need to look for a spot. It was nonsense. I was pretty furious. But
yeah.
But well, and speaking of ice cold situations, well, it doesn't sound like that's quite happening in Charlotte. It is at least happening with our own fan bases. But I think since I first did these show notes, there is at least some resolution for your Titans, as they did hire head coach Bill Callahan, and it was tough. You know, Callahan auto, they had to let him go, but I'm glad he landed on his feet there. And of course, my Carolina Panthers are still looking for someone. I mean, there's been rumblings that Arthur Smith has been interviewed, I think, at some point, which would be hilarious. Vrabel, ironically enough, I think was on his way after talking with the Falcons to go over there, and Canales, the guy from Tampa Bay, who is my favorite personally to get there. So what are your thoughts on the Titans and ultimately the hiring of Brian Callahan?
Yeah, I'll make no bones about it. I was very displeased with the Titans organization for letting go of Mike Vrabel, who I think is definitely at bare minimum a top third coach in the league, in the top 33%, I would say. And I think you can make a very strong argument that he's a top 10 coach. Took them to an AFC championship game a couple years ago. I think has always done more with less, given what he's had on the roster in Tennessee. What ultimately sounds like led to the separation, if you read the tea leaves. I mean, I don't think it's a secret necessarily based on the rhetoric that's out there. It seems like there was some sort of disagreement between Amy Strunk and how she wanted leadership decisions to be made. It sounds like Vrabel was not given the sort of a roster construction and maybe as much of there wasn't enough weight given to his opinion. Maybe he voiced displeasure with that, or maybe he just became increasingly difficult to work with inside the building. But there were rumors at the time after they fired John Robinson, which was always coming after he made that horrific A.J. Brown trade. Once they fired him, there was rumors that then VP of Player Personnel, Ryan Cowden, was Vrabel's pick to inherit the GM spot. And when they ultimately went with Carthen from, I believe, San Francisco is where he came from. And then Cowden moved on to the New York Giants. I think that I didn't know at the time, but certainly seems apparent now, reading backwards into history, that signifies the beginning of the end, because for whatever reason doesn't seem like they were getting along. Because again, I don't think anybody was really expecting the Titans to contend for the AFC South this year. I mean, maybe after the DeAndre Hopkins trade, but you're looking at an aging Derrick Henry. You have DeAndre Hopkins, and then a still unproven and struggling Treylon Burks, and just a bunch of guys after that. And the defense did what it could, but it's kind of one of those teams that's currently, I think, stuck in limbo. They didn't really quite know what they were going to be. They couldn't really be the stick it in Derrick Henry's gut 25 times a game anymore. He's just not at that point in his career. And so they just, the verbiage keeps saying, they need like I think they keep referring to it as like a fresh view or something. Like it's some BS, upstart lingo where it's like, oh yeah, we need a new perspective or something. But gosh, I would be tickled pink if the Panthers somehow landed on Vrabel. I mean, for all the wrong that David Tepper has done in Charlotte, that would at least get me excited if we could get Vrabel down here. So what are your thoughts on what's going on with the Panthers?
Well, to quote one of my favorite gifs, and to quote one of our favorite movies, it's a shit fucking sandwich dick. It's basically, since the beginning of Tepper entering Charlotte, and of course, for all the things that seemingly should be good as he's bringing, the soccer team there and everything is just being run so terribly. And I would like to believe, he would learn from his past mistakes of meddling too much. If he can, I think they brought in the outside, third-party consultants or whatever to help with this search. I don't know if it's with the coach and the GM, even though GM, they just promoted an in-house guy who, do we think he was a yes man and that's why Tepper wants him there to kind of keep his thumb on everything? He also doesn't even have the full control of what a GM would be able to do because they have bringing in the other salary guy. So there's a lot of weird moving parts, but I mean, don't get me wrong. I do like Connor in the thought that he was in Seattle for a good while, and I think in Buffalo a little bit too. So I mean, he's seen been under some good organization. So I think hopefully he would have learned some things. But can he even get to do what he wants to do and have that freedom? I don't really know. But when it comes down to the coaching too, That's why I was thinking it might end up being Canales from Tampa Bay, because Canales was in for the entirety of his coaching career, he was in Seattle for 13 years and in various offensive positions. And obviously there would have been some overlap with Connor now being the GM. So I feel like some familiarity, an offensive-minded young head coach, a guy who essentially rehabilitated Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield. I'm not necessarily saying like Bryce Young is already so far gone we need to rehabilitate him, but I think he's catered pretty well to both of them. And I've seen him in a couple of interviews kind of talking about, when they ask about his philosophy and everything, it's kind of broad strokes and saying kind of like, I'm quarterback friendly. I need to help them succeed. Like, what can they do well and how can I nurture that and build from there? So I like that thought process better than maybe a more veteran guy coming in saying like, I have a system. If this doesn't work, then it's their fault, because I have a feeling it's going to be a Frank Reich situation again, and they're not going to make it through the season. So I really hope that they actually just get a younger guy, ideally, and vrabel again, I mean, would be incredible. A leader of men, kind of like what you're saying. I feel like he did the best with what he had in Tennessee. So, I mean, hopefully they make better personnel decisions in Carolina. Jonathan Mingo, waste of a pick. I mean, there's so many picks that I feel like in the last couple of years have been absolute wastes. And the defense is strong, but how long will that be strong? Can they even re-sign Brian Burns? Like, there's a lot of moving parts, and they're already in the dumpster of the worst division in football. So anywhere but up, or anywhere, has to be up at this point. But I hope they're not too much of a dumpster, bottom-dwelling NFL team for too long, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I kind of glazed over after getting all hot and bothered talking about vrabel. I didn't really have any big thoughts on Brian Callahan. I mean, he's the son of Bill Callahan, well-known football name in the NFL and collegiate communities. But yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said, we were talking about the Panthers guy getting promoted. I worry, just like, did Brian Callahan, as I believe 39-year-old young NFL professional, did he just get in an interview and basically say like, yes, I'll do exactly as you say? And every fan base complains to an extent about their play calling, but I feel like the Bengals fan base, both people I know in real life and what I see on social media and in the fantasy community, I don't remember the Bengals play calling being highly touted as being like very favorable. It's more been about Joe Burrow making plays off script and doing things that only Joe Burrow can do. And that scares me when a guy's, a lot of his success and his notoriety that potentially led to him getting this job is based on a player. And I just am a little wary of that, but I could be very wrong. We'll see. You take your shots on these guys and you don't know how it's going to play out, but at least it wasn't like Cliff Kingsbury or something, because not a big fan there.
Yeah, I was worried because when I was looking back, because I was curious about Callahan. I knew of his dad's, I mean, over 2 decades of coaching at various places, but I mean, and still he's been in Cleveland as a O-line coach for since 2019, 2020. I mean, still just a steady force in the NFL. So if anything, he's got that kind of name, like notoriety to him. But when I was looking at just comparing someone like the younger coaching options, which I mean, like you said, 39, like young for a head coach, I guess not the youngest, but again, pretty young. He'd been in the NFL for about 13 years also, but bouncing around to a bunch of different spots. I don't know. He initially had started, actually, I think, in Denver.
I think he was a coach on that Super Bowl winning team.
Yep.
So he probably not a huge part of it, but he was on the staff, so he's got a ring.
Yeah, because he got on the Broncos staff, I think, as just like an assistant when Josh McDaniels was there, and then flamed out pretty quickly. McDaniels flamed out, but then I think it was kind of a restructuring of the team. He went elsewhere. I think he was on the Raiders for a year. I think was on the Lions a little bit, kind of in various offensive, pass game coordinator, quality control type stuff. But I mean, like you're saying about the whole Burrow situation, how I feel like it's affected Callahan and Zach Taylor. I feel like there's always the rumblings of, even when Burrow's doing well, if the offense isn't looking how it should, I feel like it keeps coming back mostly on like Zach Taylor. But now that Callahan's leaving, what does Cincinnati look like now? So you can see maybe Callahan's effect, and then Callahan moving over to Tennessee. What can he do with Tennessee? And God forbid, I don't know. Like you're saying with some of the older players, like Tannehill's gone, I assume. Derrick Henry's gone, I assume. Hopkins, I don't know because I can't remember what the contract's like. But what is the kind of movement forward? Or the helpful to have all the picks they do, of course, but I don't know. I'm very curious to see how that goes. But well, looking at some other teams, as we don't need to wallow in our collective pains anymore. So a couple of the other vacancies that have been filled: Patriots, of course, promoting from within Mayo. Raiders promoting from within Pierce. And I love that the players basically just were going to have a mutiny and made that happen. That's pretty cool. See, talking about the Titans. The big news here, this happened quite literally an hour ago before we were recording. Jim Harbaugh spurning his Michigan college fandom and fame for going over to Los Angeles Chargers. So very exciting to see that. I think they had also made a GM hire, I wanted to say the other day. So that's going to be, I think most people thought that was the big coaching destination in the offseason, considering Justin Herbert. They're in cap hell, but I mean, as the Saints have taught us every single year, that doesn't really matter. They'll kind of figure it out. And the other vacancies that are still withstanding are Commanders, Falcons, Panthers, and Seahawks. So I guess of the ones that have been filled thus far, probably the Harbaugh one for the most part. What is your thought? What kind of jumps out at you with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's you hit the nail on the head. It's Harbaugh. I mean, some of the other ones are good stories, but ultimately, I mean, outside of, Mayo is totally, we don't know what we're going to be getting there. I mean, the Patriots have the highest draft pick they've ever had in, gosh, who knows how many years. I mean, it just feels like the majority of our lives they've been, competing for championships. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there in terms of their future. And, it was a cool story with Antonio Pierce. I think that, 3-1 or 4-1, whatever it was down the stretch, made total sense for them to go with him. But, Jim Harbaugh, as much as I don't like the guy, has he's been successful at every stop. So, we have to pay attention to that. And I think he's probably going to bring, he's the kind of coach that's going to be able to draw good talent onto his own staff and hopefully elevate, Justin Herbert and bring him in the talent that he needs. I mean, I think you, as a Chargers fan, you have to be thrilled with it. And as a fantasy enthusiast, I think you have to pay attention to that because we're talking about a guy who made Colin Kaepernick successful. So, you have to think he does something positive for Justin Herbert's career as well.
Yeah, that's the weird part too, is thinking about how good Herbert has done. I know this past season, some ups and some downs, and of course had the injury there, but the revolving door of coaches and coordinators and stuff that he's had to deal with since coming in his rookie year, I think it's been pretty incredible, at least from a fantasy standpoint, what he's done. I know the team's record is, people don't say, wins and losses are necessarily a quarterback stat. I tend to agree in the sense of, I think Herbert's been a good quarterback, but a lot of shit has just gone wrong for different reasons over and over again. And of course the ownership is not at all patient to wait that out. But I mean, they got their guy, he's under contract. Again, cap's not great, but they will presumably figure it out. And I think that certainly has the biggest fantasy impact when it comes to, you've got Herbert, who is he going to be throwing to? Do you need to add another receiver? Do you keep whoever else you have now? Hope Johnston becomes something. Hope everybody else stays healthy. Very, very curious to see how they navigate that. But jumping over to the playoffs, which, like you were saying, you've been enjoying those. So we've got the conference championships this weekend, and then, of course, the Super Bowl in, again, 2 weekends after that. So for the players still in the playoffs, so that would be of the Ravens, Lions, Chiefs, and 49ers, who do you feel like has the most to gain and the most to lose in terms of their dynasty value?
For gain, I think Jahmyr Gibbs. I think, he's already elevated his status, especially given his performance this past week in the divisional round. But I think if he can produce again, and I don't know, I'm not necessarily even saying that the Lions have to win for him to elevate, but I mean, if he shows out again, has another strong performance, I think he's, in terms of redraft value, I mean, I think we're talking about a running back that probably could sneak into the first round next year. And in Dynasty, maybe for a lot of people, he already is a top 5, Dynasty asset at the running back position. But I think that if he plays well again, that hype train will get even more steam in the engine, and we'll vault him there to where he's essentially like almost, I mean, nobody's untouchable in Dynasty, but like you'd have to get a lot to want to trade him this offseason. So he was who I had the most to gain.
Yeah, that was with all of the frustration that I feel like people have had for both Bijan and Robinson and for Jahmyr Gibbs for different reasons, of course. But, I mean, both have done well given their opportunity, but I think everyone just wanted Bijan to get more opportunity over Tyler Algier. I get that. And Jahmyr Gibbs get more opportunity over David Montgomery, although just from an NFL, the real game itself standpoint, I think it's hard to argue with the kind of secret sauce that they've developed in terms of how they're able to kind of control the clock and really just bully their opponents, being able to kind of use Montgomery. Again, a lot of the stuff that he's doing, he's just grinding and pounding away at the D-line. It's not necessarily that he's going to be leading the league in yards per carry, but I feel like they complement each other so well. And while that could be tremendously frustrating on a week-to-week basis for fantasy, I think that now we can see that they trust Gibbs, I think, more, and now especially being in the playoffs, they need to use him more for those explosive plays, catching out of the backfield, that sort of thing. So, I don't think they're going to win, but I'm very interested to see how, if this is the last game for the playoffs for them, that's how they finish up.
Yeah, and it's not a apples to apples comparison. Sorry, I just want to jump in real quick. But the start of his career reminds me a lot of the start of Austin Eckler's career with the Chargers, in that, they already had a strong running back in Melvin Gordon. I think Melvin Gordon, that's not a direct comp, Melvin Gordon to David Montgomery, but just in terms of the overall split in usage. Yeah. And, eventually we see Austin Eckler grow into, never a full 3-down player, but somebody who eventually will get the lion's share, no pun intended, of the touches, but sort of just had to earn that trust and kind of just work his way, bide his time almost, because, David Montgomery is obviously a productive running back, and and Jahmyr Gibbs is obviously a strong weapon. It's just going to maybe take another season or season and a half before he really just like grabs 70% of the workload instead of, hanging on to 35-40 right now.
Yeah. And again, this isn't an apples to apples comparison, but I feel like we saw what happened with DeAndre Swift in this system when he couldn't stay healthy. So I guess I can understand their fear of like, this guy's unbelievably explosive. He's the perfect complement to a more powerful, more punishing David Montgomery. But if he just keeps getting hurt, no offense to Craig Reynolds, but Craig Reynolds and David Montgomery are not exactly the same combination as Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, despite Craig Reynolds vulturing a touchdown last game, which was baffling to me. But Dan Campbell does not care about our fantasy teams. So the guy, or I guess two guys that I had here for the gain was, I just said young wide receivers, which is kind of, I see it as Rashee Rice and Zay Flowers. I don't think Kansas City's going to make it to the Super Bowl. Again, I didn't think Mahomes would take it this far, but that's just kind of what happens with Kansas City. That's for another podcast, I'm sure. But I do think it's going to be the Ravens making it to the end, and I feel like with how Rice's role has grown throughout the season, pretty similar to Zay Flowers as well. How do they finish up? And leading into next season, I feel like the Chiefs, certainly since Tyreek Hill has left, they've just been long in search of not the next Tyreek Hill, because that's kind of absurd, but who is the next number one, or at least maybe co-number one, a 1A, 1B type situation. It's not Sky Moore, it's not Kadarius Toney, which would have been cool, but just guy can't stay healthy and doesn't know how to line up. And Rashee Rice looks like the real deal. Is he a true alpha in the normal sense? Maybe not that, but I think from a fantasy standpoint, I think he could be a pretty dependable guy. And also, is Kelsey gone after this season? So then you need more weapons, not even just Rashee Rice, but other people too. Zay Flowers, this is what I feel like is one of the more competent wide receiving cores that Lamar Jackson has ever had. And the fact that Zay Flowers is going to be, remain there. Is OBJ going to stay? I don't know. Some of these other guys, Nelson Aguilar, I think, is a free agent who has had a tremendous impact considering he's Nelson Aguilar. But between Rice and Flowers, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how they finish up. And then next year, how do people view them? Do they remember them from the end of the season, or do they think that they're going to be kind of pushed down the depth chart and not be the true de facto alphas just because maybe they don't fit the mold necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, Rashee Rice, that's a really good one. I mean, both of those are really good, but you're sitting here rattling off, talking about the KC receivers, and it's like, I think we could realistically be in a situation next year where Rashee Rice is like the only returning guy. All those guys are just cuttable, or, I don't know what each of their individual contract situations are when you go to MVS and Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney, and then you're talking about maybe Travis Kelce retiring to Gallivan across the globe with Tay-Tay, but it's just he could blow up, if the Chiefs do well in the next game or two, if they make it to the bowl, he could really blow up.
Oh yeah. Well, a little bit of a more negative look. So in terms of lose, who is the guy that you feel like maybe has the most to lose?
I think it's Brock Purdy. I don't think we've seen a good version of Brock Purdy in about a month or so. I think really ever since they played that, was it Christmas night or Christmas Eve? I think it was Christmas night against the Ravens on Monday Night Football, where he had 3 or 4 turnovers and just did not look very good at all. He's kind of been on skates ever since then. And, San Francisco's an incredibly talented roster top to bottom and has arguably the best coach in the league right now in terms of maximizing his talent and the scheme and everything. And listen, he's a 7th round pick. I mean, I think everybody that kind of got into the MVP conversation with him might've gotten out over their skis a little bit. It's from a talent standpoint, he's never going to, in my humble opinion, he's never going to be, that type of guy. Now, again, that says a lot about Shanahan's scheme and what he can do to a player to get the most out of him. But he had that incredible throw, a great throw to George Kittle last weekend for the touchdown. I think the throw to Brandon Ayuk to convert on 3rd down on their eventual game-winning touchdown drive with the Christian McCaffrey run was an awesome throw. So he's got the composure and everything to do it. But at the same standpoint, we're talking about an organization that pushed Jimmy G out of town for taking them to the Super Bowl. So, I'm not saying that that's the most likely scenario, but, there's things can change so fast in this league. And being that he's Mr. Irrelevant in the draft, I mean, it's not like they have a ton invested in him to where if they really don't get what they need out of him, or if he's really the reason that they don't win either the NFC title game or the Super Bowl, then, do they look to try to get crazy and make a move in the offseason to get somebody that they feel like really elevates them and gets them a championship in this window. So I think it's all on the table for Brock Purdy. But, if he plays well and he wins a Super Bowl, then he probably gets another contract there and we're all happy and we're, holding on to him in Dynasty. But I'm not saying he can go to 0 overnight, but I would say he's very volatile at this point, in my opinion.
That's the wild thing about just thinking of like the two camps of he's Mr. Irrelevant, which is always, it's a funny nickname to tie to someone, let alone someone who is going to rise to prominence enough in the sport to where they're going to be talked about all the time. So then it's always going to be brought up that he's Mr. Irrelevant, but look, he's relevant now. But yeah, the fact that he was even in a stone's throw from the MVP race at one point, again, it turned a sharp corner at a certain point in the season. And plenty of other people, I thought even including Christian McCaffrey had separated ahead of him. But with what he's done, and the man is getting paid absolutely nothing. So I think at least from a value of how San Fran would value him, because I know we always talk about how invested is the team in a guy, if they're kind of screwed with a big contract, they can't move it if he stops playing too well. the benefit of him is he is not getting paid anything. So they're able to pay, like, the defensive contracts they were to give a lot of players. I'm sure they have to deal with Christian McCaffrey, the cap hit. I think it's a bit worse next year or the year after that. Brandon Ayuk's going to be a free agent after this season. Debo already got paid a year or two ago, I want to say. I'm not sure what Kittle's like. So I feel like they know, like, oh, if he's good enough not to completely screw this up, which, like you said, that 4-turnover game that would be screwing it up. That would be him losing the game for him. But it's lightning in a bottle with whatever Shanahan's able to do with a quarterback in that system when he finds the right one. Mm-hmm. So hopefully, and that was actually, I completely agree. That was my guy as well for what to lose. I did have Goff in there too, kind of for a different reason. Again, it's almost
because Hendon Hooker's backing him up, right?
Dude, I want it to happen. Like, after he was, I think he was moved off of the PUP later in the season, but then just didn't play, or maybe he at least, like, they activated the 21-day window, but he still never played, obviously. It's probably not this upcoming year, regardless of how Goff ends it here, but I'm sure they would much rather not have to pay Goff a tremendous amount of money if they have Hendon Hooker in the wings. Again, I'm hoping that's not just blind bias and thinking that Hendon Hooker is the heir apparent necessarily and can ascend to Goff levels. But I also think Goff was basically left for dead and was just fodder in the trade to send Stafford to L.A. through the Rams. And he is just – it's weird that with he and McVay in L.A., that didn't work out, and Goff, whatever the stories were of, like, you know, rubbing McVay the wrong way. And then you have Goff going to Detroit with the coach talking about biting kneecaps off, and Goff is right at home. That never made any sense to me of how that worked out, but that's incredible. So a part of me wants him to stay there if they can afford it, if it can all work out, because I think he just fits very well in that system. But money-wise and as the team grows and if Hendon Hooker there, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But
yeah, what a great story. You know, him going back to California now to play in the NFC Championship game where he was born and raised. Kind of rooting for them, but we'll see.
Yeah. So, well, something that you and I and our buddy Jake have also talked about, I had a poll, I think it was about a week ago now, after the Texans had lost in the playoffs. Just curious about the kind of checking the pulse of how people viewed CJ Stroud in Dynasty. And I was also in the middle of a startup draft, and CJ Stroud went fourth as the fourth quarterback, I want to say. So, which I think was okay, but 766 votes, and this is CJ Stroud, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts. This is the quarterback you want the most in a Dynasty startup. Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts getting 10%, Patrick Mahomes getting 20%, and CJ Stroud getting a whopping 60%. Again, and I had somebody in the comments kind of making their case. He also was a Texans fan, so I took it with a grain of salt. But the points you're making were reasonably fair. So what are your thoughts on, is it agreeing with that or at least kind of seeing that point, or are you still more of a Mahomes, Allen, Hurts guy?
Yeah, definitely the latter. I think I had texted you that I thought that was absolutely bonkers nuts and big-time recency bias. I went before the show and did an honest ranking of my dynasty quarterbacks right now, and I had Stroud at 6. So my top dynasty QB would still be Jalen Hurts. I told you guys in the text, and I'll say it here, that as long as the tush push or the brotherly shove or whatever you want to call it this week is legal, I think Jalen Hurts just that gives him a slight edge over that cluster of QBs right there, because, you know, he's going to tack on probably double-digit touchdowns until, you know, and who knows, it doesn't sound like it's likely that they're ever going to rule that play out, or at least not in the immediate future. I think it is up for review, but they barely even – I don't even think it made it to a vote during last offseason, so I don't think it's probably going to get banned this offseason either. So Jalen Hurts would be my number one, and then I had Josh Allen, Lamar, Mahomes, Burrow, and then Stroud. You know, Burrow has shown me – because at the end of the day, you know, Stroud doesn't give you any rushing equity. You know, he's the way I looked at it is, you know, obviously Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, and Lamar. I'm going to put them as my top three because they're guys that can get me to 25 points. I mean, I don't know what Lamar's fantasy output was in terms of points on in the divisional round, but when a guy can go for, I would guess it was probably at least 30 points because he threw for only 150 yards, but he had over 100 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. So,
Yep.
When a guy can throw for 150 yards and still give you an absolutely elite performance because of his talent with his legs, that's why I cluster Hurts, Allen, and Lamar there. And then I graduate to the elite passers. And, there's nobody better than Mahomes in that regard. I think Burrow is right after him in terms of just like arm talent, savvy. He's got an elite, not possibly a top 3 wide receiver in the league right now with Ja'Marr Chase. We'll see what happens with T. Higgins, but he's up for free agency this year. And then, but I would be fine putting Stroud behind him there. A lot of the other quarterbacks have question marks, and we saw Stroud elevate a team that I think during the offseason, 2 years in a row, I believe on this podcast, I have been horrifically wrong about who the worst team in the NFL was going to be. The year before, it was the Seahawks with Geno Smith, and we know how that story got written. And then this offseason, I'm railing on the Texans, and we have CJ Stroud with, Brevin Jordan and freaking Tank Dell. I mean, I'm not trying to disparage Tank Dell. He's clearly a talented player, but Tank Dell and Nico Collins and Bobby Trees, and he's just freaking slinging it all over the yard, breaking records. So, I mean, you have to pay attention to that, but I think it's absolutely absurd to have Stroud as the number 1 dynasty quarterback right now.
Yeah, that was the huge reason I did that, of course, to being in the startup, and like he wasn't taken as the number 1, but just the kind of discourse, I was like, I mean, I know he just played and like they just got knocked out, but he still did well, but I'm like, am I missing something here? And then I'm still looking at these poll results, and I'm like, I still don't think I'm missing anything. Like, again, I really was thinking when I saw this, I was like, this has to just be recency bias.
Yeah.
And I mean, really just looking at like, in terms of like my dynasty ranks, like it's Allen, Mahomes, Hurts, and actually I have Lamar and then Stroud. So I have Stroud 1 ahead of Burrow. That, if anything, was the toughest part for me. That was the actual consideration of like, there's no way Stroud is ahead of the other guys, but is it also recency bias of like Burrow started tough, was getting better, and then got hurt. We haven't seen him in a while. We've seen CJ Stroud play all year and play at a high level. Am I possibly discounting Burrow just because I haven't seen him in a while? But I can stomach that difference of the 5 and the 6 versus
I don't have any
he's
problem
1.
if somebody wanted to tell me Stroud over Burrow. Yeah, I mean that's preference, but don't lie to me.
Yeah, well, I'm after kind of seeing that and kind of hearing people talk about it, certainly on Twitter and everything. I'm very curious as we get into throughout the offseason if there's any trades in different dynasty leagues, or also obviously once we get back into redraft season, how people are viewing him there, which I guess probably pretty similarly, I'd imagine. But so kind of talking about this offseason and getting into next year. So all these college players kind of jump into the NFL ranks. Some didn't, and it kind of felt like a lot didn't, at least maybe from what we were expecting. Who was your biggest surprise who decided to go back to college?
Treveyon Henderson from Ohio State. I think it was pretty unanimous that most people had him as a definite top 5 running back, and more than likely a top 3. I mean, he's somebody that I'm really excited about, a true 3-down back that can pass catch, that can run between the tackles, and somebody that I think, these days we saw running backs go in the first round last season. I'm not necessarily saying he was a first round lock because the winds change every year with team needs and everything, but definitely a first round talent in my opinion. So interested by that one, but I think that's kind of the possible unintended or unforeseen consequence of the boom in the NIL era is that, he's probably getting well compensated for his time in Columbus.
Yeah, that was my guy too. I was honestly pretty baffled because also, I mean, Quinshon Judkins going from Ole Miss over to Ohio State too. I'm like, that already happened, and then you're just going to go back to Ohio State? Like, again, with kind of the landscape now, certainly now with Harbaugh leaving Michigan, I think Ohio State is positioned pretty well to compete. Again, they are pretty much every year, but specifically this upcoming year, I think could do tremendously well as they're having enough people come back. But I mean, yeah, the NIL money has to be decent enough, and he has to have spoken to his agent like, I mean, you're going to get, early to mid second round draft pick. This is probably where you're going to get paid. If you want to just go back to college for another year, like, you could probably make the same, if not a little bit more, hang out with the boys. Yeah. I don't know. Like, it seemed more of like,
maybe win a natty, win a Big Ten title. And, who knows, maybe, him and Emeka Egbuka talked and said, hey, let's run this thing back and do it right. They'll have a new quarterback this year, so, but yeah, that one was definitely surprising.
That is an interesting thing too. So if NIL can encourage some of the better players that do still have eligibility to go back to school, a big reason they'd go back is for NIL. But I feel like what is often talked about, this is more in basketball, like being able to have the players long enough on the teams to be able to like not create dynasties in college, like with the same players, but have them on there long enough to where like that you can have each of them get a chance to get a title or at least taste a title. And I think the fact that the NIL is kind of drawing a lot of the better players back to college, even if it's just for one more year, it's a cool thought. Obviously, selfishly, I want players are most relevant to me once they make it to the NFL because I don't pay enough attention to college in perpetuity to really have the pulse to it and kind of know everybody until they make it to the NFL. But we'll see. I won't say they're going to win the Natty, but I feel like they have so many talented players at this point, and it's just the parody of the college football now. But so looking at this class, though, the people that they've declared or, of course, are out of eligibility because everyone in this class is like 25 years old, as Jake made the joke the other day of the age of some of these quarterbacks. But who or what sticks out to you in this class, whether that's a position group, whether it's a specific player, that kind of thing? Who is that?
Yeah, so you took the words right out of my mouth. I'm going to credit Jacob for bringing this up in the group chat the other day, but it's got to be, for me, the age of the quarterbacks in this class. It's we as fantasy football players, as lovers of the NFL, constantly fall in love with the potential or the ceiling that some of these younger guys have. It's almost like the ones who only have maybe a year of starting production. Think back to like Mitch Trubisky or Trey Lance, guys that we haven't seen a ton of data on. It's like, well, they played pretty well in those 11 starts or 12 starts or whatever that they had in college. Like, where could they possibly ascend to? And 8 of the 11 top quarterbacks on Mel Kiper's big board are, at least 24? Is it 24 or 25?
By the end of the year.
By the end of the year, we'll be at least 24.
Yeah.
So, and that's a position in particular that people really focused on, getting those younger guys and kind of molding them and trying to get these 3-year players out of college. And you've just got more seasoned veterans, whatever you want to call it. But is that going to make this draft class a total flop on the quarterback side, or is there the potential that maybe this class is very successful at that position? And then what are the ramifications and changes that has moving forward on how scouts and teams view the position? Because if you hit on a couple of these guys, like if Bo Nix is a hit in the NFL, like, do people start rethinking like, hey, maybe we should be looking more at the Hendon Hooker type player and like Sam Hartman and Jaden Daniels and these guys that took a few more years. And let's be real. I mean, in some certain cases, took a few more years in college to be successful. I mean, Bo Nix was not who he is now when he was at Auburn before he transferred to Oregon. And Sam Hartman was successful at Wake Forest, but really took kind of, I think, that next step a little bit at Notre Dame and proved himself in a different kind of pro style offense over there. And so it'll definitely be interesting to see. And like I said, it could be a nothing burger, but it could have some far reaching implications.
Yeah. I feel like thinking about the last couple of years, like Kenny Pickett was one where he was a bit older. I think he was only 23 going into the draft, I want to say. Hendon Hooker, like I just mentioned, was older than 23. But it's more of like, it's one of the quarterbacks or maybe two of the quarterbacks that are going to be drafted day 1, day 2 are the older guys. The fact that there's that many people that, again, they're coming from these bigger programs, like they are the big names that are going to be drafted.
Yeah.
Interesting, though, with the scouts on these teams, now you have this much more of tape to watch. So it's like, how much more comfortable do you really feel? And some of these guys, I know specifically like Jaden Daniels and stuff like, and Bo Nix, like you were saying, you almost felt like they really turned a corner in their final year. Not saying the years before were bad, but like you notice certain things where it's like, oh, they're noticeably better in these certain areas. Do you believe like that's good that they can improve and they can do that, but do we now believe we've seen their ceiling and that's it? Or they showed that they can improve, so ideally they can improve more once we get them, even though they're 25, 24 years old. Interested to see how that happens. When I was looking at this, wholeheartedly agree with the age of the quarterbacks, but thoroughly like the strength and the depth of the wide receiver class. I was thinking back to 2010 class and 2014 class of just top to bottom, I guess, of the notable guys. 2010, Antonio Brown, Demaryius Thomas, Des Bryant, Golden Tate, Emmanuel Sanders. And then 2014, which I think is the one that's usually talked about a lot, Jarvis Landry, OBJ, Mike Evans, Brandon Cooks, Devontae Adams, Sammy Watkins, Allen Robinson, and John Brown. Funny John Brown was included in that. But I really feel like this wide receiver class is going to be kind of amongst that trio. I don't know if I don't think it's going to be the best of the three, but I think it has a chance to jump into the second best of that trio there. But like some of its landing spot, that sort of thing. But I think there's a lot of these players, especially a lot of the receivers that are the bigger guys, which is the opposite than we'd seen. Remember the one year it was like the Rondale Moore year where it was just so many of these like little guys where it's like, how many slot receivers can we put sandwich into one rookie draft? This is the exact opposite.
The New York Giants are on line one.
That's right. But yeah, very, very excited to see where some of these guys land. And in terms of excitement, I know like we've been talking about playoffs. Ultimately, the big show is the Super Bowl. And in Vegas, who do you think makes it to the Super Bowl, and who do you think wins the Super Bowl?
So I know this is going to come as a shock to you because you alluded to it earlier in the show that you didn't think they could get there. But I am going to say the Kansas City Chiefs will upset the Baltimore Ravens this weekend, and the 49ers will avenge their loss to Kansas City in Super Bowl 54. I think San Francisco beats KC in the bowl. I do think Brock Purdy will do enough to get it done, and I don't know why. I can't necessarily put a really big reason on why I think the Chiefs are going to edge out the Ravens, other than just I don't know. Lamar Jackson just hasn't really been seemingly able to get over that hump, and Josh Allen we just saw play I won't say almost a perfect game, but I mean he played so well. You know, we saw the dime he dropped to Stephon Diggs that Diggs dropped. You know, if Chris Jones isn't the player that he is and gets that pressure and applies that to the lineman and doesn't let Josh Allen step into that throw, he hits that touchdown pass to Khalil Shakir, and we're talking about the Bills in the Super Bowl, in the AFC Championship game. So I just saw how well Josh Allen played last weekend, and Patrick Mahomes still found a way to get it done. So I just, for some reason, I think we're witnessing just a truly amazing and future Hall of Fame talent in Patrick Mahomes. I think he's going to edge out Lamar Jackson, but I do think that the 49ers are just a beast, and they've been winning games. You know, they won that game without even playing very well against the Packers, one of the hottest teams in football over the last half of the season. I just think that eventually they're going to, during this game and into the Super Bowl, they're going to finally get back into their rhythm, and just it would help, obviously, if Deebo Samuel is healthy, but I still just think they're a much more talented team than the Lions.
Yeah, that was so I'll be boring and say I'm thinking it's going to be Ravens-Niners, and I think Niners are going to win it all. At the beginning of the season, I thought it was going to be Niners and Bengals, Niners winning it all. That, of course, got completely derailed as the Bengals just crumbled for a number of different reasons. But although Browning did his level best. But after watching Mahomes win, and again, it was Mahomes winning, it wasn't Josh Allen losing. Yeah, he played an incredible game. There's plenty of moments where I feel like you can see he was about to make the mistake that he's made in past years with certain throws, and he instead, throws it out of the back of the end zone instead of making that stupid pass that's going to get picked off. Like, there was a number of things that I feel like he did, and of course, just as he often does, puts the team truly on his back. But I mean, yeah, so many deep balls missed with it was Diggs, Shakir, Sherfield, I think is the other one. There were so many that I feel like they were right there. Some tougher than others. No offense, Diggs, but it really felt like it was one play away. Which for a number of reasons, with Bass missing the field goal, again, it was not their day, unfortunately. And unfortunately, Allen has lost that game a couple times before, so it just kind of builds to a different narrative. But yeah, I feel like even if the Niners don't have Debo this weekend, they would like to have him for sure. But I think that they can get by without him, and having 2 weeks off, Debo gets healthy. Certainly you better make sure that CMC is 110% just to run all over that team. So I think that while I would like to see what you're explaining, see the Niners get that revenge against the Chiefs, I do think Lamar Jackson does enough and is efficient enough, which he has been this season, to get himself to the Super Bowl. But right on. Well, that is it. But as you very well know, Tyler, guest gets the final word. So what do you have? A quote, a shout out, insult, anything you got?
I'm going to shout out to me because I deserve it. No, yeah. But in all seriousness, I am proud of myself for holding down the fort for 2 weeks while Megan was gone working at the Rose Bowl and then the national championship game. Also, shout out to her for doing that while being 6 months pregnant. So she got through that with a plum. But it was a very big boost for my confidence as a father, being able to handle things here at home with Emma on my own. We even did a round trip flight to Florida to see my parents and my sister and Andrew and the kids. Nice. So anything is possible now. The world is my oyster. I can take on any challenge. So,
dude, that stretch of time, I feel like, was there probably moments where there's like certain things you did, or like you got in a certain routine, you may have had to stop yourself and be like, I fucking got this. It was great.
Yeah, and admittedly, I leaned very heavily on Mickey Mouse Clubhouse on YouTube, so we're having to wean her off of that a little bit. But yeah, you just got to do what you got to do to survive when you're making all the meals and cleaning the kitchen and you're doing laundry. I mean, it's just Mr. Mom was in full effect, but we got it done. So all the dads out there, you're better than you think you are.
That's right. Well, hey, yeah, the house does not stop. So the fact, you got to keep everything rolling. So yeah, props to you, and of course, props to 6 months pregnant, running and gunning out there. So that's pretty impressive. But I appreciate it. Good to catch up with you, obviously, and we'll be hitting that group chat, probably talking more about Harbaugh and all these matchups this weekend.
Can't wait.
See you, brother.
See you.